This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Oh, we are tail spinning our way right into the new year on this channel. This is, I believe, our second full year. Hard to believe. Been at this since the summer of 2021. And we're still going strong. At least I'd like to think we are. But we're here for what will end up being the final podcast for the year 2023. Thank God. I just did my year in review episode last Monday. Go check that out if you have some free time. You'll get to hear my general takes on WWE and AEW and my top 15 match of the year list. I thought the show turned out all right. And for the amount of effort I put into editing and gathering all the information for it. But now we are back for a regular Monday and Friday format going forward. Today we got the classic reviews for NWA, Mid-South, and World Class. Then on Monday, we will dive back into the Retro Raw, Retro NXT, and regular SmackDown shows. And we'll also make sure we get the date right for the Retro Raws this time. I won't screw that up again like I did over the last couple weeks. So it's a new year, fresh start, and hopefully that burnout factor doesn't kick in. I'm enjoying the classic reviews for sure. Yeah, the modern WWE stuff, it's kind of hit and miss. So long as they don't screw up Cody versus Roman or anything involving Punk, I think we'll be in good shape. And who knows? 2024 might have a few surprises ahead of us. Perhaps AEW can be saved. Yeah. It's very wishful thinking on my part. But we will remain optimistic for good news. It's the new year, so you got to come at it with positive vibes, you know? Otherwise, we'll just be left in a bubble of doom and gloom. And Lord knows wrestling's been in that bubble for the last 30-odd years. So, y'all ready to dive into some classic content? I sure am. Let's do it. So we are back for what will be the final episode of Crockett TV from 1987, which also just so happened to fall on my birthday. And as we go into our cold open, it's funny, I actually had a thought occur as I was watching this. In the video clip, we see the Horseman running down Michael Hayes. Flair's trying to belittle him and discredit any chance at him ever becoming world champion. And, of course, we end up getting the confrontation with Hayes and the rest of the group. Arn tries to sucker punch Hayes from the side, and that kickstarts the 3-on-1 brawl. I am assuming they shot that angle last week, because it happened at the Atlanta studios. But it's amazing. For all the talk I've ever done about how, you miss one episode of AEW Dynamite, you may as well have missed an entire year's worth of content, because you never know what the hell's going on with that show. I didn't see last week's episode. I didn't catch any highlights. I didn't watch any clips. I knew exactly how everything here evolved. Because remember, a week or so prior to them shooting this angle, they had done the Ric Flair-Michael Hayes world title match in Miami Beach, which they aired on TV. and we didn't get a clear-cut finish before they had to cut the feed for the program. But I never had to think to myself, okay, why is Flair mad at Michael Hayes? Why are these guys yelling at each other? I knew the backstory. I knew the context. It all made sense. I knew why Luger wasn't there. Because obviously 2 weeks ago, they already shot the angle where the Horsemen turned on him at the bunkhouse stampede. So it accounted for why he wasn't out there with the rest of the crew. You know, isn't it great when I don't have to do research prior to watching the shows? That I can just sit down and automatically remember how things carried over from previous episodes? If only that could be applied to wrestling in the modern era. But we've established the base for early on. And we're also back for another on-location taping. This week we are in Raleigh, North Kakalaki. And while Flair and Hayes is sort of the lingering main event program right now, we also have a big main event for this week's taping. It is the Midnights defending the U.S. Heavyweight Tag titles against Dusty and Nikita, the Superpowers, which is a pretty big matchup. I always love these on-location tapings because the crowd environment is so wild. I mean, they're on their feet screaming for pretty much everything the entire show. And it was funny at the beginning because the announcers are pitching some things for later on, and all of a sudden the crowd starts erupting as guys start filling the ring for the first match. And I'm like, oh, there's probably some big-name talent in there. People are going wild right now. Maybe they're doing the Midnight Superpower match right now. So they cut to the ring, and the opening match, the Mighty Wilbur and Ron Garvin versus Chance McQuaid and Tommy Angel, with people literally blowing a gasket in the crowd before the bell rang. That is when I knew this business is very much outdated. Keep in mind, for those that are following along in the retro timeline, a mere 3 months ago, Ronnie Garvin was the World Heavyweight Champion of this promotion. This man defeated Ric Flair inside a steel cage. Here in late December of the same year, he has now been relegated to teaming with the Mighty Wilbur. Can you say the word demotion? But the people still love him. Total one-sided squash. Garvin did all his usual hard-hitting offense. Wilbur did all of his not-so-hard-hitting offense. It was very plodding and slow-moving. Garvin ended up knocking out Angel with a right hand so he could then tag in Wilbur to hit a running splash. On the dead body who just got knocked out by a punch, mind you. The people ate it up, though. Like it was the main event of WrestleMania. Me, on the other hand, I just kind of saw it for what it was. You know, the fact that Ron Garvin is now curtain-jerking TV tapings with makeshift tag partners. And boy, was this ever a makeshift pairing. Ronnie Garvin and the Mighty fucking Wilbur. Yeah, glad to know that team didn't last too long. And then they both did a laughably horrible interview at ringside. By that, I mean, Ron Garvin was okay. You know, just sort of regurgitating the same talking points when it comes to winning his title rematch with Ric Flair at some point in 88. And then right as he's wrapping up, he turns to Tony and goes, and my man Wilbur has something to say too. To which my immediate retort was, no, Ron, please, have mercy. The torture is too much to bear. And so Tony slowly edges the mic toward Wilbur. I begin to shake and shiver, and completely out of breath, sweat pouring from this man's head like a defective faucet. Wilbur begins to stumble and fumble around for words, trying to put together a halfway comprehensible promo. He basically had nothing to say, except to thank Mr. Garvin for being his tag partner this evening. And he kept referring to him as Mr. Garvin over and over again. Part of me was thinking, no, he's just being kind. The other part of me was saying, you know, it wouldn't be a surprise if Wilbur had no idea his first name was Ronnie. And it got to a point where about a full minute of nothing happened. Tony is still holding out this goddamn microphone for Wilbur to speak. I am shouting to the top of my lungs, get the mic away from him. And finally, Ron Garvin had enough sense to pull the mic over to him, just trying to bring this all-time horrendous promo to closure. It's got to be a rib. Them letting this man speak. How in the fuck have they allowed this man to cut multiple promos during his run with this company? They never figured it out. Every single one of them falls flat. Because the guy never has anything useful to say. You'd think at some point they would have realized, you know, maybe we just ought to have Wilbur be a mute. Everyone would be better off. You think? Then we came back for the Road Warriors versus Bob Emery and Trent Knight. And I guess during my impulse stream of consciousness typing, this one came back to bite me. I mistyped Trent Knight as L.A. Knight. Freudian slip. Pretty straightforward. Death by 1,000 power moves. LOD won with the Doomsday in about 45 seconds. Which then took us to David Crockett in the aisleway for an interview with Lex Luger. And again, we are still in the aftermath of the Horseman split, so it's all relatively fresh in people's minds. You know, Luger's recounting everything that went down in Miami. The night the Horsemen turned their backs on Luger and tried to take him out. And all the lying and manipulation that's gone on in the group. You know, them saying that they were trying to teach Luger a lesson about respect. But the way Luger sees it, they've stepped beyond that line. And now it's Luger that's hunting the Horsemen individually. You know, pretty simple stuff. And boy, you can just hear how massive Luger is getting over with the people. You know, it really didn't take long for people to get on his side, though. Like, you hear the footage of him getting jumped by his fellow comrades. You play up the sympathy card long enough to where Luger admits to all his wrongdoings in the past. Now promising that he's going to start doing things the right way. Lo and behold, doesn't take a whole lot to convince a sea of people that you can change your colors. And there are no shades of gray with anything they're doing. You know, Luger is 100% out of the group now. He's a lone wolf. And his goal, his obsession, is to take out every member of the Horsemen and get back at them for what they did. Very effective stuff. Up next, we had Larry Zbyszko versus Ricky Nelson. I was trying to figure out watching this. Did Larry get a haircut? Or was he just extremely damp? Maybe he just dumped a whole bottle of water on his head before coming out. But his hair looked shorter than normal. And wetter. Yeah, pretty fun match, though. Larry's as old school as it gets. So he's breaking out all the classic heel tropes here. I know the boomers hate that term. But he's yelling at Hebner to do fast counts, calling out hair pulling and tight grabbing anytime he was getting worked over, bad-mouthing the fans. You know, all the typical heel stuff you would expect out of Larry. It just pisses off all the marks because the guy literally does nothing. That's the genius of it. Baby Doll was kind of useless as always. sort of playing cheerleader on the floor, but not really getting involved. And the only thing I really noticed with her is how much bigger she was than Ricky Nelson, both in terms of height and muscle mass. But Larry won with a swinging neck breaker. And then we come back for a very important announcement with Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone. And no, it's not one of those Tony Khan major announcements. That's usually not an announcement at all. Just a lousy excuse to try to pop numbers by lying to the people and saying it's something more important than it really is. No, in this scenario, a not false advertising scenario, they are talking about the Bunkhouse Stampede, specifically the 10 finalists that will be entering the Bunkhouse Stampede at the Nassau Coliseum. And in addition to those 10 men, there will also be a wild card spot. And in order to determine who gets that spot, 5 men will be competing in a cage at the Omni to see who gets the special wild card spot in the finals. So, kind of a second chance for anybody that was already eliminated from the previous bunkhouse matches. And among the 10 qualifiers for the finals, we have Big Bubba Rogers, Tully and Arn, the Warlord, the Barbarian, Ivan Koloff, Dr. Death Steve Williams, the Mighty Wilbur, Lex Luger, and Animal. Not Hawk, but Animal. And of course, during their plug of the wild card match, as soon as they throw Dusty's name in there, you're like, fuck. Of course. Cat's already out of the bag. I mostly just groaned when I heard that the Mighty Wilbur was one of the 10 finalists in the 1987 Bunkhouse Stampede. They were like so destined to get that guy over. Boy, did it flop. So then we go back to the ring for Sting versus Mark Fleming. I had a lot of phlegm building up as I was watching this happen. I'm just ribbing. It was fine. Stinger was a house of fire here. I enjoyed his series of warrior splashes where he kept leaping from side to side and then landing on Fleming's chest. We also had a great production moment here, but you had to pay very special attention to see it. Otherwise, you'd have missed it. There's a point where they do a crowd shot, and they show a very young gal waving at the camera with a big smile. And while the announcers are plugging how excited the fans are, JR sees the girl on camera and goes, "She's definitely excited. And I'm excited to have her." And the moment they cut back to the action, you actually see JR and Tony in the frame calling the action on the floor. And if you look closely, you can actually see Tony breaking up and laughing to himself. Probably over the semi-creepy comment we just heard from JR seconds prior. Just, the guy couldn't contain himself. So the mugging here goes on for about 9 more hours. The crowd was actually getting more lukewarm the longer it went. At one point, Sting tried to deadlift Fleming up into a powerbomb position, but then realized he didn't have a firm grip on him. So instead, he just kind of held him upside down for a minute before finally running him into the corner post. For a split moment, I thought, this fucker's about to spike this guy on top of his head and kill him. And considering how green Sting was at this point, I would have been shocked if he just let go and let this man perish. But he spared him. Did a couple more things and then eventually went over with the Scorpion Deathlock. He also hit a very wacky Stinger splash in the corner. Basically just flailed his arms in the air and went, ah! It was very cartoony. And then we went to a Dusty and Nikita promo where, honestly, I have no idea what the fuck happened here. All I remember is Dusty was talking about how he and Nikita saved the world by uniting two great countries together, to which I then laughed uproariously at the thought of Dusty calling Russia a great country. Russia is many things. Great? Not the first adjective I would use to describe it. I also like how he implied that they basically established world peace. All the fighting and the warring going on. Yes, Dusty and Nikita, they were the first to unite the entire world. US and Russia are now comrades because of Dusty and Nikita establishing a tag team. The fuck? I mean, I love Dusty, but come on. Grasping at straws much? It's one thing to call your team these superpowers. To then assert that you are singly responsible for ending global warfare. It's a bridge too far in my book. I also have no idea what Nikita said here, but I remember words were spoken at one point. Then we had Dr. Death versus Kurt Thompson, where I spent the entire match wondering to myself, did Steve Williams and Scott Steiner ever have a recorded singles match together at any point in WCW? If they did not, it is a crime against humanity. I'm still trying to recall a single instance where those guys would have crossed paths together in the ring. But like the entire time I'm watching Williams deadlift and throw around this fucking Kurt Thompson, the more I just keep thinking to myself, this is exactly what it's like watching a Steiner Brothers match from like the year 1995, where they're just out there picking dudes up, throwing them around recklessly, not giving a fuck where or how they landed. It's like every Steiner Brothers match I saw on Nitro from like 95 to 97. Everything Williams was doing in this match. But I need to see if I could find a Scott Steiner versus Dr. Death match. I just want to watch those dudes pick each other up and throw the other around for like 10 minutes. This was an awesome squash. Now keep in mind too, when I'm talking about Williams throwing around a guy like Kurt Thompson, he was not a small dude. Thompson was jacked. Like he was about Dr. Death's height too. Not as strong physically, obviously, but the guy had some muscle mass to him. You know, Williams was in there tossing him around like a pancake. You know, running him down, working circles around him on the mat. At one point, Thompson tried to body slam Steve, so Steve just gun-wrenched him and then threw him overhead like a sack of dog shit. I gave this a rousing ovation when it was over. But Steve went over with a stampede. Pretty standard stuff there. At which point, we then cut to the driest Barry Windham promo of all time. I was like, dude, I literally just watched Steve Williams kill a man. Now you're going to subject me to a piss-warm Barry Windham promo? Highly offensive. He said some stuff about Steve Williams. That's all I got. Something about him promising not to go easy on him the next time they wrestle. I mean, on the one hand, you can tell they're slow burning that heel turn. But God, the path to getting there is like grinding teeth. If there ever was a time to hotshot a heel turn, this would have been the point. So after I awoke from that power nap, we had Ricky Morton promising that he and Robert were going to shove the New Zealand flag up the sheep herders' Hershey Highway. Those were not quite the words used, but the message was more or less the same. Then we had Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert versus George South, which was, in its simplest terms, a very technically sound wrestling match, but it was all moves. There was some mat work where Gilbert worked over South's arm. Beyond that, it was pretty much something you would see out of a video game where the player just kind of spams every move possible that the AI has synced up to the character. That was it. Just rapid fire moves over and over again. Then Gilbert won with the stun gun. It was kind of the epitome of, we have Eddie on the show, but we have nothing for him creatively right now except for a possible U.S. title match with Dusty at some point, where evidently he's going to lose anyway, so who cares? And it's funny, too, because if you go back and read about Gilbert's run in the NWA around this transition to the Turner sale, they end up doing some interesting things with him, especially around early 89. They'll wind up getting him involved with the Varsity Club story once that becomes more prevalent. At some point, I remember he starts interacting with Flair more on TV. Like, they were definitely pushing him. And I think the rumor was they were initially planning on making him a member of the Horsemen. I'm thinking that would have been long after Barry had already replaced Luger, though. If I had to guess, it was probably when Tully and Arn left in September, and they were desperate to try to keep the Horsemen stable alive. So they were sort of bouncing around ideas of who they were going to replace Tully and Arn. And I think Eddie Gilbert was among the names mentioned, in addition to some other guys. I think Butch Reed was one. Kendall Windham might have been another part of that discussion, too. I'm a little hairy on that. Obviously, none of it worked out because JJ and Barry ended up leaving for the WWF during the height of all that. But I remember Eddie Gilbert's name was thrown out there because Flair liked him. Well, let's just say for a period of time until they both got stiff with each other. More on that on a later date, though. Then we had a legendary Legion of Doom promo. What amounted to the single greatest moment of Hawk's career. We'll get into Hawk in a sec. I'm just smiling thinking about it. It was so goddamn funny. First, Animal threatened to beat up all the guys in the bunkhouse match. Told them all to stay away from him. He's vowing to take home the money. And it was all well and good. Simple little selling point for the bunkhouse finals. And then we get to Hawk. Yeah. Hawk got on the stick. And, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to read you everything I wrote down. When I tell you this was Hawk's promo, almost word for word, I promise you, I'm not kidding. Remember earlier how I was joking about the Mighty Wilbur having nothing to say in his promo? So he just kind of finger-fucked around for words and tried to come up with random verbiage to talk about the stall for time. Well, you see, Hawk not only did that here, but he outright admitted to the fact that he had nothing to say. He goes, "This is our interview time. We bought our interview time. And we're going to say whatever the fuck we want. And no one's going to stop us." And there's a slight pause. Everybody's angrily looking into the camera. And David Crockett, of all people, ever the objective journalist, goes, "Well, what are you trying to say, Hawk?" And Hawk, deadpan, turns to David. He stares a hole through him. And then eventually he goes, "Nothing. Tell him, precious Paul." And God love him, Paul Ellering, the professional of the century. He breaks character for approximately 2 seconds to laugh at the absurdity of everything he just heard. And then, just like that, gets right back into character so he can cut the promo for his boys. and I have no idea what he said. Something about Mark Twain. Something about the weather. But that Hawk promo. Yeah, that one's a keeper. I don't think we've stumbled across that one yet. This is my interview time. No one's going to steal it. So I'm going to say and do whatever I want by talking about absolutely nothing. That's genius. Buying interview time so you cannot make a point. That's like Seinfeld logic right there. It's a promo about nothing. God, these guys were ahead of their time. And they say the Road Warriors were meatheads. Insulting. So then Michael Hayes beat Larry Stevens in a relatively uneventful squash. Went over with the Bulldog in about a minute. Really nothing to say about that. And from there, it was back to JR and Tony so they could cut to a VTR. And this is all centered around the Horseman controversy. We are now at the Omni on Christmas Day, December 25th, obviously for a house show. And they're in the middle of one of their bunkhouse battle royals. In one of my more frantic moments of typing, I was actually trying to jot down a handful of people that were in the match. And I'm not kidding you. I looked away from the screen for literally half a second. And when I looked back, there were two people in the ring, Tully and Luger. And I was also able to conclude that JJ and AA were a part of the match, since they also had ring gear on. Anybody else that could have potentially been involved, I'd completely forgot about. Just one body getting dumped out after the other. Like, there were no setups for it. Like, you know how in battle royals today they have to be so dramatic about the eliminations to make sure the camera catches everything in the frame? Not here. Nope. One guy would just grab the other by the neck and toss him out. Just casually. It's amazing. But again, it finally boils down to Luger getting Tully in the rack, and he's able to successfully toss Tully over the top rope to the floor, only to then immediately get jumped by Arn and JJ, and eventually Tully comes back in, so it's 3-on-1 heel beatdown, and they're whipping Luger like a proverbial government mule, and while the attack's going on, who should appear from out of the void amidst the white noise and rowdy fans but Ole fucking Anderson? I had totally forgotten that Ole made another cameo in Atlanta toward the end of '87. But here he was, running down to be a helping hand for Luger, beating up his fellow comrades, now bitter enemies. Another previous member of the Horsemen that was cast to the wayside earlier in the year. Seems like an eternity ago at this point, but yeah, that happened. That was one of the big feuds at the beginning of the year in 1987, when Ole Anderson got kicked out of the group. You remember that? The Horsemen stomped him into oblivion, left him for dead in the locker room at one of the house shows in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, not only is Ole back temporarily, but they flashed up a graphic on the screen for the upcoming January 1st event in the Omni. It is going to be Ole and Luger versus Tully and Arn. Two former Horseman teammates going up against two current Horseman teammates. So that's pretty great. And Ole got a hell of a pop too when he came out. The people did not forget about him. Good place to return to. Atlanta, GA. You know, they more or less used a house show in the Omni to set up another big house show match in the same building just a week or two later. So I'm sure the room will be red hot for that match. Hoping to see some footage of it. Oh, by the way, Ole and Luger did some promos over the house mic, but a lot of it was inaudible because they had the fan cam footage, but the audio quality was terrible. Couldn't pick up on most of what they said. But that was a nice appetizer for the TV main event. As advertised, we come to our Midnight Express versus Dusty Rhodes Nikita Koloff U.S. Tag Title match. Actually, wow, I just thought of this. Have we seen Dusty wrestle on the syndicated programming yet? He's definitely never wrestled on the studio shows. I know that for a fact. Maybe we've seen him work a couple matches on TV during like the Bash Tour events, in the live venues, obviously, because Dusty wasn't working studio matches. Now he's got standards, bro. But this was kind of cool. Seeing Dusty work a TBS match. Didn't see it too often. Of course, it's against top talent. He wasn't going in there with Nikita to wrestle fucking Chance McQuaid and Lee Peak. I miss Lee Peak. Whatever happened to him? He was my favorite local Atlanta job guy. Mostly because he sucked. So, of course, Corny gives the big introduction. He's got the fucking Santa tennis racket with him. Looks like a complete goofball out there. And meanwhile, to make it even better, there's stoic Big Bubba right next to him. Just being Big Bubba. But he's right next to the most cartoon character on the entire show. Now, that's no disrespect to Jim. It was quite the amazing visual, though. But I'm super stoked about Midnight Express history right now. Because I finally opened my Midnight's box set from Cornette's Collectibles. God, I had pre-ordered that back in, early September? First time I ever pre-ordered anything that far in advance. Just because I knew it was going to be a hot seller, so I wanted to make sure I got one. But I wrapped that baby up for Christmas, because, that's what you do when you visit family. You buy shit for yourself, and then 3 months later you unwrap it and say, whoa, big surprise, look at this thing that I bought for myself. It was a cool box set, though, it really was. The action figures were cool. I was a figure collector when I was a kid, but, now that I'm older, the first thing I immediately went to was the scrapbook and the autographed 8x10. I had him specially write it out, too, for his autograph. Thank you, fuck you, bye. I had to. But, I spent an hour or so on Christmas reading through that whole timeline and, try not to play spoiler because I know we're right in the middle of running down the Midnight's history right now. So when I get to the 88, 89 stuff, I'm a little hesitant. A lot of that stuff, though, I already kind of knew about because I've talked about it numerous times on the channel. The Midnights were my favorite tag team growing up. So as I got older and started seeing more clips and more tapes of them, I just went into a huge rabbit hole deep dive of Midnight Express matches. So a lot of their history is pretty much ingrained in my head at this point. Funny thing, too, this tag match is not part of the scrapbook, which is very weird. And considering how meticulous Cornette was with documenting all the important career moments for his group. But there's no mention of this TV main event in the December 26th Superstation edition. First thing I noted about the match was the giant welt on Dusty's ribcage. Looked like a fucking staph infection. It was grotesquely large and purple. Couldn't take my eyes off of it. Now, of course, there's so much detail that goes into the logistics of how they laid the match out. It was fairly lengthy. They went through a couple breaks. But as is the case with a lot of these main event TV matches with the top guys, they understood pacing and timing. They're not rushing to try to get their shit in. You had Bobby and Stan bumping and selling like crazy in the early goings. Dusty and Nikita are in there trading tags and just having their way with the heels. Doing multiple teases of Big Bubba challenging Dusty to fight him on the floor. Crowd's going ape shit for all that. And eventually you get the heels cutting off Dusty and working him over for a while. I did note the one ridiculous spot here where Stan was choking Dusty with a tie in the ring ropes. And from the camera angle, they were filming it at the floor. Like, it was totally apparent Stan wasn't remotely applying pressure. It looked like John Cena when he does that fake STF submission hold. But this is kind of the genius of the Midnights as a tag team in a lot of ways. Not only were they remarkable athletes that could do all the moves, so their heat portions were never boring because you were just fascinated with all the stuff they did. They could also sell like crazy too. Especially Beautiful Bobby. Like, whenever he's in there feeding for Dusty and Nikita, bumping around like a jumping bean, bouncing off the ropes, doing the semi-flare flops. He was such an extraordinary individual. That's why I always took to Bobby Eaton as a kid. She's like, I can never take my eyes off of him in the ring. The way he moved, the way he sold, the way he would set things up. He was always in the right place. He rarely missed. If you go back and watch a Beautiful Bobby match, that guy was usually on point. 99% of the time. And I like how the extended heat session kind of carried over through Dusty into Nikita, because Dusty would tag Nikita in, and he would run wild for maybe a few seconds, but then the Midnights would cut him off again, and they would take control. And it all kind of breaks down at the end, as these big matches tended to do a lot of the time. You get Dusty running wild. He gives Bobby and Stan a double DDT at one point. They try to have Bobby go up and give Dusty the big knee drop, but he rolled out of the way. And that set up Dusty to put the figure four on Bobby. And Stan got cut off trying to break it up. And from there, that's Corny's cue to hit the ring and immediately have the match thrown out for a DQ. Got the classic shot of Dusty putting the Weaver lock sleeper hold on Cornette. Corny's bug eyes bulging out as he goes unconscious. And they do the angle afterwards where Hebner's yelling at Dusty like, dude, wake him up. He's out. And all the Midnights are standing around waiting for Dusty to revive the man. But no, Dusty's just standing there with dick in hand. So finally Bubba goes, never mind, I'll save the fucking guy. I got one foot out the door anyway. What do I have to lose? So he helps Jim, and the Midnights immediately attack Dusty and Nikita afterwards. Keep in mind, during that whole altercation, I am supposed to be cheering for Dusty. He put a man out cold with a sleeper hold, refused to revive him, was about to let this man die, and while all the heels are waiting around for Dusty to help, Dusty's just standing there. As Corny's convulsing on the ring mat. Yeah, but of course, the Midnights get some of their heat back afterwards, and they give Nikita the flapjack. They tease that they're going to give the rocket launcher to him, but Dusty rolls in and covers up Nikita so he can take the brunt of the impact. And I guess that was also somehow supposed to cushion the effect on Nikita, even though Bobby still landed on top of him. Who, mind you, Nikita was also underneath a 340-pound fat tub of goo. I'm thinking Dusty may have worsened the situation. Again, a lot of stuff to keep track of at the end there. But it's kind of the selling point with a lot of these TV main events. The chaotic nature of everything that happens. It's kind of the draw. But at the same time, when you see it only once on a 90-minute program and not in every goddamn segment, makes it a lot easier to digest. There's less of a burnout effect for the fans. Really good match, though. Fun angle. Everybody worked hard. Crowd was into it. Again, it's interesting how Cornette never documented this in the Midnight Scrapbook. I don't know if maybe he was trying to conserve paper and didn't think it was worth the mention. If he just forgot to record it. But it's kind of an important detail, too, because I'm pretty sure Bobby ends up getting a series of U.S. title matches with Dusty out of it. Like in the month of January, there's going to be that period where the Midnights are kind of coasting along in singles matches and not really doing much in the way of big tag feuds until the Fantastics show up. So I think this was kind of the launching point to set that program up. Can't really remember what they do with Stan. He'll probably end up getting a TV title match with Nikita. Although I think Nikita ends up dropping the belt relatively soon, right? Forget, he loses like Mike Rotunda or something. So maybe that feud didn't transpire. And we all know Big Bubba's on his way out. And he doesn't stick around for much longer before going to the WWF. Yeah, it's a very weird stage we're about to enter with the Midnight's career. Kind of like the weird stage we're at with the Horsemen right now. Sort of transition period where, the groups are still around, but trying to figure out what the next logical step is. Oh, and speaking of the Horsemen, they were all out there for a promo next. Following up on the video feed we saw involving Luger earlier on. And it's pretty standard heel stuff. Tully's telling Luger that they'll roll out the red carpet if he wants to try to face them all, because the Horsemen thrive on chaos and bedlam. They'll take their chances at the numbers advantage. I like his closing line where he goes, "See, Luger, we have the gold. We have the belts that say World Heavyweight Champion. All you got is abs." And Arn's promo was pretty great too. Talking about the ways Luger used to impress him, the way he would turn heads at the airport, the things he could do at the gym when he was training. But all that doesn't mean a thing when you sacrifice blood and family for personal self-interests. If Luger wants to do it all himself, that's fine. But when he makes threats of coming after the Horsemen, that's coming after family, brother. And Double A is going to be there to defend the honor of his friends and partners. It was awesome, too, because while Double A is trying to cut this really super stern promo, he's constantly trying to readjust his sunglasses because they kept drooping down over his nose. They were too big. So finally, after like 3 failed attempts at trying to keep them above eye level, finally Arn just pulls him off and throws him to the ground. Doesn't break kayfabe. Doesn't think twice about it. He just goes, "Fuck these things," and just moves on. What a pro. And, then Ric Flair got on the mic and said this.
Wing!
So, yeah. That was more or less the show right there. They also killed about 5 minutes of airtime with Mike Rotunda versus Dave Isley, which was boring beyond belief. Almost as boring as Kevin Sullivan's dry, dull commentary. By the way, the Raleigh crowd agreed with my assessment on how boring it was. They too were also chanting it. Think about that. Raleigh, North Carolina, chanting boring during a Mike Rotunda match. Who'd have thunk it? Well, he went over with something. I didn't write it down. Who cares? And then with about 2 minutes left of remaining airtime, we had another bunkhouse battle royal of sorts. And I love the graphic for this. They don't bother counting how many bodies are in there. No names mentioned. The graphic just reads, all caps, Bunkhouse Stampede. And I guess we were left to interpret what that meant. It was indeed a bunkhouse stampede. There were many people in there, dressed in street clothes. In the case of Steve Williams, his football gear. As is typical with a lot of the multi-man matches, you have large stretches where guys are just kind of standing around doing nothing. My personal favorite here, for the 90 seconds they actually aired of it. Guys are fighting near the ropes, brawling in the various corners, all that stuff. And meanwhile, during this huge chaotic brawl, there's Sting in a pair of jeans and a tank top, just casually standing there with hands on his hips, tugging at his waistline, just kind of surveying the situation, but not really getting involved. The classic Steve Borden move. Just totally phoning it in and not giving a shit. Well, to be fair, and I can't confirm this because there were so many of these Bunkhouse Stampede matches throughout December, it would not surprise me if this was his first one. Like his very first Battle Royal. He probably had no idea what to do. So he's just looking around. He's like, everyone's kind of preoccupied. Guess I'll just kind of stand by the wayside and observe the situation. It was amusing. I also don't recall many times I've seen Sting in jeans. Probably a handful of times during the dying days of Nitro where I could go back and check, and he's probably wearing jeans at some capacity, but it was not a look I was accustomed to. You see the guy in the jumpsuit for all those years, and he's out there in street clothes, and you're like, oh yeah, Steve Borden was a normal person. And of course, we don't get a finish here. They cut the feed pretty much with no eliminations. I did see some guys brawling on the floor, but I don't know if they officially went over the top rope. I don't know. Just kind of a way to fill the ring with bodies to kind of end the show, send people home happy. I'm sure we'll get some follow-up footage to see who actually won the match next week, but, really nothing else to go on there. Pretty fun show overall, though. Another 90-plus minute episode. But the Dorn Arena was a nice venue to tape the show from. Again, Raleigh crowd was pretty hot, except for that Mike Rotunda match. I love the Midnight Superpowers match. The Horseman Luger stuff is great. Seeing Ole come back was a nice surprise. Again, totally forgot about that little detail. I'm sure it was only for a cup of coffee, though. Ole wasn't working a full-time schedule at this point. But as we close out the Crockett reviews for 1987, it was a good one to go out on. Another relatively banner year for the promotion, at least in terms of product reception. We're starting to see some of the bookings seep through the cracks a little bit. Financially, the company's significantly in the hole. But I think we're still at the point where Crockett didn't really know how bad things were. That wasn't until he met with the financial team and they sort of broke the news to him. But 88. It's going to be a very interesting year to go back and rewatch. Because even though a lot of the on-screen product was relatively good, especially early on, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that totally contradicts it. Financials, locker room morale. They're going to be losing some key players this year, too. It's actually kind of scary what happens over the next year if you think about it. But it's going to be a hell of a roller coaster ride. And we're going to talk about all of it as we work our way through the retro archives and relive the classics. Now we're going to flip the page back about 5 years on this Christmas edition of Mid-South Wrestling from 1982. A very special card book for this week's program. As you know, we missed last week's show. So at the top of the program, Boyd Pierce announces that there will be a loser of the fall leaves Mid-South stipulation match. Originally it was scheduled to be Ted DiBiase and Matt Bourne going up against Mr. Wrestling 2 and Stagger Lee. But we'll talk about the modification to that main event later on. A show-running theme of sorts. And the last time we saw a loser leaves Mid-South match, it was the Junkyard Dog that took the fall. allegedly banning him from Mid-South for 90 days. And, of course, around that same time, that's when Stagger Lee showed up. So DiBiase's been on a mission to try to reveal that Stagger Lee is JYD. And I guess it would have been last week's episode. They did a non-title bout with these same four guys. DiBiase and Bourne versus Stagger Lee in Wrestling 2. And apparently the babyfaces won that match. So it set up this week's title bout, even though it didn't wind up being this exact match. Plus the added stipulation of the loser having to leave the territory for 90 days. Again, we'll get into it as we run down the card. But that was mainly the big story for this week's episode. Before we get there, though, let's quickly talk about Mr. Olympia versus Tug Taylor. Fucking Tug Taylor. He's back. And he's rounder than ever before. Looking like a giant bagel with pubic hair rising from the top. It's also good to note that Bill Watts mentioned in the last Loser Leaves Mid-South match, where JYD took the fall, guess who his tag partner was? Mr. Olympia. Might not seem important right now, but keep your eyes peeled. Contextually speaking, there's more to this story to come. And Olympia wound up going over with the sleeper in like 3 minutes. Really nothing much else to say about it. Then we came back for Hacksaw Duggan versus Chavo Guerrero. Non-title. That'll be important when we factor in the finish here. At this point, Duggan is still the Louisiana States Heavyweight Champion. And likewise, Chavo is still gaining a lot more traction with the fans every time he's featured on the show. And they kind of worked the David versus Goliath role here. Chavo struggled to gain the upper hand early on, but he ended up chopping Duggan down to size and targeting the leg. He applied some leg holds and some knee bars at various points. And they do a great finish where Duggan gets Chavo in the corner. He tries to set him up for the running spear, but Chavo leapfrogs Duggan in the corner, sends Duggan headfirst into the steel buckle, and then Chavo sunset stacks him up and pins him clean. Big pop for that. Then, of course, while Chavo's celebrating, Duggan's down on the side, gigging his forehead to show the blood from the turnbuckle shot. It was a cool little added effect. You know, Duggan's flipping out afterwards, going into a tirade, pissed off that he just got outsmarted by the new kid on the block. But again, with it being non-title, Duggan still keeps the belt. But not without a price. I mean, the whole thing only went like 7 minutes, but they managed to pack a lot of action in there. And they tied in some potential story implications for afterwards. I have to assume Chavo will probably get a title shot out of it. But we'll see. Staying on the subject of Duggan real quick, amidst his ongoing TV feuds at the moment, he is also currently beefing with Mr. USA Tony Atlas. So as we come back from commercial, Bill Watts and Boyd Pierce show some footage of, guess it would have been last week's show. They advertised a Hacksaw Duggan Tony Atlas match. And they showed the last few minutes where Tony is, cough, cough, making the offensive comeback. It was quite offensive to watch. In reality, it looked like a monkey trying to fuck a football. But you catch my drift. And while Duggan's in trouble, here come the rest of the Rat Pack to try to distract the official and run amok at ringside. After DiBiase and Bourne get taken out, Duggan winds up putting on a giant green hood so he can spear Atlas. And obviously the presumption is that the gimmick was loaded. Loaded with what? I'm not exactly sure. Perhaps lead? Maybe a cinder block? But down goes Atlas for the 3 count. Then we get that classic Bill Watts line. Oh, I guess the Rat Pack can claim that victory. For whatever it's worth. Just totally disgusted with the way the whole thing went down. I did appreciate the cameo-colored hoodie that Duggan used to win the match. It was just silly enough to where I could still buy it, but also have a good laugh about it. Also, Tony Atlas still sucks in the ring, but hey, he's got abs. And in 1982, that was pretty much all that mattered with a guy like Bill Watts. Were you big? Did you have muscles? Good enough for me, brother. Those are pretty much the only criteria. Speaking of Atlas having horrible matches, someone apparently decided that it would be a good idea to book him in a handicap match with the Davidson brothers. It was, well, to be fair, it was only like 3 minutes. So me saying it was awful would be slightly exaggerating. Atlas did a lot of double-team power moves. You know, lots of spots where the Davidsons would try to Irish whip Atlas off the ropes, but then Atlas would outpower them and run them into each other. You know, at one point, Watts joked about the Davidsons' combined muscle mass not amounting to one of Tony's arms. He was not entirely wrong. But Atlas ended up going over with a press slam and a spear. I don't even remember which brother or Davidson brother he gave it to. Didn't matter. Crowd dug it, though. You know, the Davidson brothers are actually a pretty fun job team. They're like the perfect old school set of heel jobbers. Like two plump, out-of-shape Neanderthals who couldn't wrestle worth the shit and had rotten basics. And because there were two of them, you had double the awfulness. Then following that, we had Kamala going over Tony Torres in a short squash. And the gimmick with Kamala now is that he's a mask collector. So for every masked opponent he defeats, he removes their masks and then keeps it as a trophy. And he pretty much did the same here with Tony. You know, the idea behind this was that Tony's mask closely resembled Mr. Wrestling 2's mask. And as we know, they're currently running with the story of a mystery man in the Mid-South area defaming all of Wrestling 2's masks, sending him threatening notes, the whole deal. The indication, from what we've been led to believe, is that Kamala and General Skandar Akbar are behind the raid of denigrations. But it's all speculative right now. We really don't know. So after Kamala wins, he goes to rip off Wrestling 2's mask and place it on his giant staff. And that brings out the real Wrestling 2 to get in the General's face, reading him the riot act. And while the General tries to blow him off and walk away, Wrestling 2 spins him around and decks him with the right hand. So here come Kamala and Friday to jump Wrestling 2. And at first, it looks like Wrestling 2's about to gain the upper hand and send everyone packing. But as 2 snatches up Friday and tries to rip off the mask, Kamala comes down off the top rope and gives him a big splash. And that lays out Wrestling 2. So immediately here comes Stagger Lee and Mr. Olympia to the rescue, running the heels off to the back, coming to the aid of 2. And it was a pretty heavy heat angle as they pitched to their commercial break. You know, again, Watts is talking about how it potentially jeopardizes the main event because we're coming up on it right now and Wrestling 2 is obviously hurt. So we come back. Watts and Pierce are at the booth, and they inform us that Wrestling 2 has been carted out. He's not in critical condition, but clearly not in any condition to compete tonight. And the Rat Packer's still in the ring waiting for a signal of what to do, but 2 is definitely not going to be able to compete for the scheduled Loser Leaves Mid-South match. And, well, Bill Watts, too, had a Freudian slip moment here. As he's running down the main event one more time, he inadvertently referred to Stagger Lee as the Junkyard Dog. He caught himself, but as he immediately tries to backpedal on it by saying, "I'm frazzled," just like everybody else in the building is. I was just sitting there like, a likely story, Mr. Watts. Could have retaped it, but, they had a good hearty laugh about it. So after completely killing the gimmick that everybody already knew about, you get the heels trying to indicate to Alfred Neely that, well, hey, Wrestling 2 should lose via forfeit and be forced to leave Mid-South since he can't compete. But Neely says the match will go on, and Stagger Lee will have a replacement partner. So as we're waiting to see who's going to come out with them, who should it be but Mr. Olympia, the former Mid-South Tag Team Champion. By the way, this is also a Mid-South Tag Title match. I don't think I mentioned that. If I didn't, I apologize. I was kind of presuming people were following along in the timeline and already knew about that. So the match, just to wipe the slate clean and start over again, there's been a lot of turnover here. It is Stagger Lee, a.k.a. Not the Junkyard Dog, and his partner Mr. Olympia, who is now replacing Wrestling 2, versus Matt Bourne and Ted DiBiase of the Rat Pack. Stipulation still intact. And we've now miraculously come full circle. 3 months ago, Mr. Olympia was involved in the Loser Leaves Mid-South match, where JYD had to leave the territory because he dropped the fall. Now we're in December, a few months later. Exact same stipulation. The only difference is Stagger Lee has taken the place of Dog. Kayfabe. And at the point they actually rang the bell to start the match, they only had about 8 or 9 minutes left of airtime. I'm not sure what the official runtime was for this match, but there was a pretty substantial jump cut about midway through, right in the middle of the heat session. And the funny thing was they still had another match that followed this. So this may have gone a tad longer than what they showed on television. But, for the most part, it was basically a tornado tag. It was no DQ anyway, so tag rules weren't really enforced. And while they're doing the big brawl at the end, Olympia puts the sleeper on DiBiase. Bourne tries to go up top, but gets cut off by Stagger Lee. And while Olympia's clutching the hold on DiBiase, here comes Duggan with that gimmicked hood. And he climbs on the ring apron so DiBiase can shoot Olympia off. Olympia goes flying into DiBiase's hood. Boom, head collision. Takes the big bump, like he'd been shot in the head point blank with a rifle. And then DiBiase crawls on him and gets the 3 count. A lot of shit to try to compact into about 4 minutes, but that's pretty much all the time they had to work with here. I remember this match vividly, especially a lot of the fallout that happens as a result of this. I mean, spoiler going forward, but they end up re-airing this match like 7 or 8 times in the next 3 months alone. I did not remember this match being that short, though. I thought it got way more time. Maybe when they re-air it down the road, we'll see more of the actual footage instead of the edited tape. But, that's kind of really the big takeaway in all of it. Mr. Olympia sacrificed his career to be Stagger Lee's partner when Wrestling 2 was unable to wrestle. And now Olympia's out of Mid-South for 90 days because he dropped the fall. What could have been and probably would have been Wrestling 2's match to lose. So we'll see what happens in this lingering program. I mean, we're already coming up on JYD's suspension lift. It'll be 3 months by the time this tape wraps up. So Dog will be back in the next couple weeks, I presume. And as for Olympia, he'll be out of action in the Mid-South area for a few months. Likewise, he'll have plenty of time to reflect back and stew on this. Did I make the right decision? Or did I stick my neck out for somebody that wasn't willing to return the favor? To be continued. And then for our final standby match, because apparently we needed one of those. It's Gino Hernandez versus Tim Horner, with Paul Bosch jumping in on commentary to fill in for Bill Watts for approximately 1 minute, as the entire match consists of the following. Gino beat Tim with a Russian leg sweep in about 45 seconds. And this one didn't even have a jump cut. That was the entire match. They locked up, did a few shoot off the rope spots, and then Russian leg sweep, 1, 2, 3. To which I kept asking after it was over, so you had to cut out a large portion of the Mid-South Tag title match because you needed to make room in the taping block, yet you also had to air a 45-second match with Gorgeous Gino and Tim Horner. Could you not just save that time for the previous segment? I mean, I like Gino. Tim Horner, I'm kind of ambivalent about, but the guy was a solid worker. But did we need to see this match? Probably not. But whatever. Most of this week was all about the drama with the Mid-South Tag title situation. We had Wrestling 2 getting laid out by Kamala in the General, which ended up changing the main event, as Olympia voluntarily subbed for Wrestling 2 in the Loser Leaves Mid-South match. And as a result, Olympia is now out of a job for 90 days since he lost the fall. So that's kind of the big story takeaway. Dog will be back soon, but now Olympia's on the shelf for 3 months. And it all ties together logically, as we'll see this program brewing over the next several months. It would definitely be a show to go check out if you want contextual analysis, just to watch this one segment alone and kind of see how everything unfolds from here. But that was kind of only the real important takeaway here. But that rounds out our 1982 Mid-South series. I know we got a late jump on it because we only started the review series in, September? So we really didn't even review the entire timeline for Mid-South in 82. But we will be doing so for 83 and 84 and hopefully 85 and so on. And those are some of my favorite years to go back and watch. A lot of exciting things coming up for Mid-South in the next year or two. Definitely looking forward to it. What I'm not looking forward to is talking about this episode of World Class. We were, not in for the best of nights. Now, figuring it was a holiday week, it's usually not the time of year where wrestling companies go out of their way to put on good cards. But when I had to hear Mark Lorenz at the top of the program try to sell me that the Missing Link versus Terry Gordy and Mike Von Erich versus John Tatum were, quote, exciting main event matches, it was a hard sell. By the end, it did not live up to expectation. Make sure you stick around for this program. You're going to get to see Missing Link and Mike Von Erich wrestle. Goody goody. So we'll try and trudge through this one with as minimal amount of pain as humanly possible. No promises. Kicking things off, what ended up being the only real highlight of the show, and it was the encore feature, the 6-man tag title bout from the Cotton Bowl event in October. Mike and Kerry Von Erich and Bobby Fulton taking on Chris Adams, Jake Roberts, and Gino Hernandez. Now, you remember, prior to this match airing, they had already shot the angle earlier in the taping where Adams laid out Kevin with a chair shot and then sent him away in the ambulance. So that's why Bobby Fulton was there to fill in as a third babyface partner. And the story they kind of had going here was Kerry trying to lure Adams into the ring so he could beat the crap out of him. But of course, you had Gary Hart in Adams' corner, so he was the earpiece the entire time, strategically helping him stay away from Kerry at all costs. There were a lot of ebbs and flows here just because the match was really long. So the heels actually got a chance to work the heat on all three babyfaces at various points. I think the best way I can describe it, when Kerry and Bobby were in the ring working, the action was good. When Mike was in there, you were on pins and needles the whole time. Please don't fuck anything up. Please don't fuck anything up. I think the only bad spot here was Mike giving Kerry the cold tag at the very end. I mean, it was so cold it'd be enough to crack an iceberg. But, well, as we may remember when we reviewed this match a few odd months back, the Von Erichs, I believe, were the defending six-man champions going in. So the finish saw the title switch after Adam superkicked Kerry during an attempted vertical suplex on Jake. And all of that happened behind David Manning's back, so we never saw the interference. So the heels ended up walking out with the straps. It was a good match. Like I said, hot crowd, which you had to figure. I mean, working in front of that Cotton Bowl Stadium crowd, they were into everything. And in terms of fallout, I mean, we're only a few months removed from that match. We ended up seeing the Kevin Chris continuation on TV, where Kevin got his modicum of revenge by giving Chris a chair shot. Jake Roberts was doing the pupil storyline with Kelly Kiniski, which I believe is still ongoing as we speak. Doesn't look like it's long for this world, though, because they've already started teasing dissension amongst each other. And Gino and Baby Doll are still in the midst of their beef with Stella and Sunshine. So there have been a lot of moving parts that have taken place since that six-man. I presume the heels are still the current six-man champions, but I'm not sure if they've been recognizing that on TV or not. God, remember how long it took for them to even show that Gino was the American heavyweight and Texas heavyweight champion at the same time? They kept acknowledging it on TV over and over again, but we never actually saw him physically come out with both belts. And then finally, after like 3 months, he actually showed up with 2 belts in hand. So they weren't lying to us. But that was almost half the show right there, re-airing that Cotton Bowl match. Then we come back to the Sportatorium for Jose Lothario versus Tony Falk. Been a while since we've seen Lothario in the Dallas area. God, I can't even remember the last thing he was involved with before he disappeared. Tony Falk, I remember he was a pretty notable name from the Memphis region in the 80s. There's really not a whole lot of information about him, though. Like some of those wiki bios have a little bit of his career timeline from the 80s and 90s, but there's not much on his background or anything. And he was a little before my time, so I'm just kind of going on instinct right now. Haven't really seen a lot of his work. I mean, here he was just job fodder for Lothario. And, I mean, the match was okay for what it was. Long stretches where Lothario was just kind of grinding on Falk in a headlock. But they kicked it up toward the finish with Lothario fighting out of the corner and setting up Falk for a running bulldog. More of just a way to kind of reacquaint the people with Lothario since he's been off of TV for a while. Not really sure how long he sticks around from here. It's kind of the Jose Lothario track record in Dallas. He pops up occasionally, maybe works a program in the undercard with somebody from Mexico, and then he vanishes for like 8 months on end. So it's kind of like AEW booking. And then from there, we come back for Jake the Snake Roberts versus Chick Donovan. Oh, the massive 260-pound Jake Roberts, to be exact. Kind of an interesting story they had going on here. Again, playing into the injury angle, they were working with Donovan, since he was legitimately coming back from knee surgery not that long ago. He still got the giant knee brace on, the tape and everything. So, like a shark smelling blood. Jake was immediately all over that limb. And I mean, Jake was brilliant. He could get away with literally doing nothing in a match. But you could just watch his facials and the way he would grind on body parts. Him leaning into the aggression and getting in Chick's face whenever he was working him over in a knee bar. I mean, like I said, he could get the most out of virtually nothing. Yeah, a lot of great heat in this match. I mean, Donovan didn't really do much except sell. Made a small comeback toward the finish, but Jake pretty much cut him off immediately and then won with the lariat. I was trying to watch it in a vacuum while ignoring most of Mark's commentary. God, just when I thought I was getting burnt out on Bill Mercer. I mean, that guy's fucking JR compared to Mark Lorenz. God bless the guy, but fuck. His commentary was the shites. But that was that match. Again, not much else to say. We all know how great Jake was. Chick Donovan, he was a serviceable underneath babyface, but he wasn't lighting the world on fire in the ring. He wasn't over like the Von Erichs either, so didn't lend itself to being the most exciting match to watch. Tell you what, though, it was the Midnights and the Rock and Roll when you compare it to anything the Missing Link ever did in a ring. You want to talk about the quintessential definition of Terry Gordy having to wrestle a guy with 2 left feet. It's the worst 3-minute Terry Gordy match I've ever seen. I mean, he's literally out there doing everything to bump and sell for this guy. And the Missing Link is doing whatever the fuck the Missing Link usually does. Headbutting and meandering around like a drunken soldier. Being wacky. And of course, the payoff. The proverbial middle finger to all the viewers at home. After having to sit through this torture, it is Skandar Akbar hitting the ring for the blatant DQ. And one of my more favorite Akbar moments I can recall in recent memory, where Gordy tries to grab a handful of him on the ring apron. Not once, not twice, but 3 straight times. And every single time, Akbar would just jolt out of the way so Gordy couldn't grab him. But it was so comical with how Akbar moved. Like Gordy went to reach out and Akbar would just go, nope. And he would scoot to one side of the ring apron. And then Gordy would try to walk toward him and grab him again. And Akbar would go, nope. And he would scoot to the other side. And then finally Link clubbed Gordy from behind and laid him out. God. The worst 3 minutes of television in Terry Gordy's entire wrestling career. The official low point was this match on the December 29th edition of World Class at the Sportatorium with the missing fucking link. Just horrendously awful. And yet, it was still somehow miraculously better than Mike von Erich versus John Tatum, where they had the gall to announce that this match had a 45-minute time limit. Had to be a rib. I'd have been hesitant to book Mike von Erich in a 45-second time limit match, much less 45 minutes. By the way, whoever voted for Mike as Rookie of the Year, I hope those people were never permitted to vote for anything again in their entire lives. They say there's no such thing as a wrong opinion. Now, normally I'm one to agree with that assertion. In this case, I wholeheartedly dispute it. Mike von Erich being voted Rookie of the Year under any jurisdiction is simply factually incorrect. And no one can change my mind. But let's talk about John Tatum momentarily, since he's a newer face we're seeing show up in the Dallas region. I remember only slightly more about John Tatum than I do Tony Falk. He actually ended up working with World Class through pretty much the end of the promotion's run. Like prior to the USWA merger when they took over World Class and the CWA banner from Memphis. If you actually look at his career, though, he was really only in the business for what? Some like 10 or 11 years? It's really not a whole lot of time if you think about it. And outside world class, and I think a brief stint in the UWF, he really didn't venture anywhere outside those two territories. Never worked for a major promotion like WCW or the WWF on a long-time basis. Never branched out too far beyond the southern territories. He was kind of in one place for most of his career. Actually, now that I think of it, didn't he start off in Crockett Promotions as a job guy before he came down to world class? I think he did. Don't quote me on it. I'm not an expert. I didn't do my John Tatum research before sitting down to record this. I think Michael Hayes trained him, which is how he got one foot in the door with world class. A decent athlete, good heel, very green, which didn't help his case with having to basically carry Mike here. I mean, the match was abominably bad. Mike is just... I mean, I say it every time. God love the kid, but fuck, he was terrible. He could barely do a collar and elbow tie-up without making it look like he was in his first day in wrestling school. This guy's been around for a while. I mean, you could tell there were long sequences where Mike would grab Tatum in a headlock and they're fishing around in a stationary hole for like a minute straight. Clearly, Tatum's trying to call shit for Mike, but they're making it so obvious. Like, Mike had no idea what he was doing in there. He eventually won with a crossbody attack, but it was like pulling teeth setting it up. I mean, their duck unders and rope running sequences, God, they were hideously bad. At one point, I wasn't convinced Mike was even running. It looked like he was sleepwalking. But again, it's a Von Erich match. Regardless of my opinion, people loved it. I have no explanation. Different time. But, I mean, that's kind of what Tatum was used here to do, was put over Mike. That was about it. He would be used better later on when they started working him into bigger programs with bigger names. But, I mean, at this point, he was just kind of on the show. They were getting him over with the crowd, trying to introduce him, that kind of thing. I think we've seen a few Tatum squashes before in '83, but again, he was nothing more than enhancement talent anyway. God, this is a 5-minute slog to get through. I mean, as was the last 10 to 15 minutes of the entire show. But hey, they gave me the warning message at the beginning. I mean, I pretty much knew going in, well, they're not trying this week, clearly. A missing link and Mike von Erich match booked for the card. Given time. They may as well have just left up the graphic warning content message for the last 10 minutes. That probably would have been better than having to watch those two final matches. But as we round out 1984, we will be starting a brand new chapter of World Class as we move into 85, which means we're coming up on the debut of the Midnight Express before not too long. Well, actually, they've already debuted at the Reunion Arena, but we haven't seen any of the content yet. So hopefully those tapes start coming up soon, because I know they wrestle at the Christmas Star Wars event with the Fantastics in a losing effort. But more on that later. Boy, do I have a thing or two to say about the Midnight's run in World Class before they went to Crockett Promotions. Not a lot of good to come out of it. But yeah, that'll wrap up this one. And the next time that we are here on the channel, it will be a brand new spanking year. 2024 cometh. So, get ready. And as always, thank you everybody for watching the show. Make sure you subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Again, we're on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday going forward. And this coming Monday, we will be back to the regular format, so we'll be doing Retro Raw, Retro NXT, as well as Friday Night SmackDown. We're gearing up for Rumble season, brother, for both the retro and the modern content. So, a lot of big things ahead. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Peace out.